Hello there, it's good to be back with you again. Tonight I'm going to be talking with someone who has crafted a very successful career out of her love of the natural environment and the diversity of wildlife within it. Something of a polymath, at various times she has scripted, directed, researched and produced some formidable documentaries for the Discovery Channel, Animal Planet, National Geographic and the BBC, amongst others. She is the wildlife filmmaker Jacinth Latta. Jacinth, welcome to In Conversation.
Hello. Thank you very much for having me. It's nice to be
here. It's great you're here. Jacinth, I just described you as a bit of a polymath. Of all the different professions within the filmmaking universe, which is the one that you would most closely identify with?
Well, I see myself as a producer of wildlife films, but that is it's quite a big role, and it's not quite the same as a traditional producer in the film industry, where the producer is just involved with the financial side and overseeing the finances throughout the production. In television, and in particularly wildlife television, it's a broad role with a lot of creative elements, particularly if you direct and script write as well.
Because I thought it'd be useful if we began with some definitions. I'm pretty clear about what a director does, and I'm pretty clear about what a writer does on a film, but I'm not so clear about what a producer does, because there seem to be many different kinds. There's executive producers and supervising producers and series producers. I once read somewhere that a producer on a film is responsible for everything that you don't see on the screen. Is that correct? What would your definition be?
Well, definitely. I mean, obviously, as a producer of wildlife, you're very much with the project from the beginning to the end. So you go through the sort of 4 phases that make up a production, and that starts with the origination of the idea, and coming up with an idea that's timely and exciting and saleable. And then you pitch that idea, so you're involved with that whole commissioning process and trying to get some money for your project. And then you take it through to the pre-production phase, which is where you're obviously researching and you're working. You have a whole team. You have your researchers and production managers and so on. So you're working as a team to bring that idea into reality. How are you going to make your film? Where are you going to shoot it? Who are you going to employ to be the camera people? What's the story? What are your animals? What are the characters? What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? What are the limitations of the money and the budget? So your pre-production phase is a very creative phase, and you need to do a lot of organisation there, obviously. But you're at the same time writing your script and developing your ideas along with the planning side of it. And then you move into the production phase. And if you're also a director, so I also direct films. So obviously then you go out on the shoots and you put on your very creative hat of framing your shots, thinking about where you're going to interview people, trying to find your animals, and then there's the post-production phase, when you bring your materials home and you sit in with an editor and get really involved in the pulling together of all your strands and weaving your film, and seeing what you managed to get and what you didn't. But that whole process, I've been involved in that process from A to Z, and I see that as a producer's role. But obviously, part of that is directing and script writing and those other creative elements.
But as a producer, would you always be present on a shoot, on location? Is it,
no, not always. I mean, it very much depends on the project. So in certain projects, you might employ a director specifically for their vision or their particular way of their experience with that subject, or if you want a particular look. So as a producer, you're not always there. But if you are a producer director, then you generally are. And in the small teams that we work with in wildlife, you tend to be out there and directing as well as being the producer.
So does this mean that you're the one who always has the final word? I mean, the buck stops with you?
The the buck does stop with you. Yeah, it does on the whole. Although you're working in a team, so it's always a team effort. And you've got your, you have executive producers. That's what the executive producer role is, to keep an eye on the supervising producers. They are someone to sound your ideas off. So you're not completely alone in that, but certainly the producer carries a lot of responsibility.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah. So Jacinth, you were a child of the city. You grew up in London and you went to school there. Was that a happy time for you?
Excuse me. Yeah. School was extremely happy time. It was a very, well, I went to Pimlico School in central London.
We have your school on the still and on the screen, and it doesn't look to me like a place you would have a happy time, really.
No. I mean, it's an incredible building. It's since been knocked down, but it's a very brutalist building. It was built in the 1960s. It was made out of concrete and steel and glass, and it was very, very extreme. It was quite an extreme environment. It was very hot in the summer. Obviously, all that glass is like the greenhouse effect. You just are boiling in your classrooms, and in the winter it's freezing. And it had a sort of rubberized black concrete, a rubberized black passageway running through the whole length of the school, and great big red banisters that were very sort of aggressive colours, if you like. So it was quite a harsh environment, but it was a very creative school, and it had a real mixture of people. There was a lot of music students were there, and so it was very diverse. And I've still got very close friends who came from that school, and a lot of people have gone on to be very creative in their careers. So I see it as it was a very happy time. It was very grounding. But I think in some ways I did rebel against that environment, that physical environment, which was concrete and quite claustrophobic at times.
I was going to ask you, at what point did a city girl decide that what she really wanted to do was to get out into wild open spaces and nature?
I think it was really when I started to study biology, and I'd spent most of my life in the inner city, in a concrete school. But when I started learning about biology and went out on field trips, I remember one particular field trip. I went to Pembrokeshire, and it was just such a wonderful awakening. I was in a field looking out over the sea, and it was an early summer day, beautiful English weather, and we were counting flowers in the field. We were looking at a metre by metre quadrat and counting all these really beautiful spring flowers in the field, and bees. It was just an idyllic moment, and it was a real awakening and a real sense of being outside and being in the open air and having the sun on your face and feeling the breeze and seeing that blue sea beyond. I think that for me was a real epiphany that there was a world out there, and there was a wild world, and I wanted to explore it and find out more about it.
Yeah, well, you did leave school, and yourself and a friend managed to get enough money together to do some serious traveling. You started by going to India, where you get a first taste of filmmaking. Now, how did that come about? I met Damon Samuel Smith, who's actually the head of science at Viking, on that first field trip to Pembrokeshire. And I think we both shared that love of nature and that sense of wanting to explore. And so we headed off on an exploration. We went around the world, and our first stop was India. And we started we went to Delhi Central train station, which is a great colonial red brick building in the centre of Delhi, full of just hundreds of people everywhere and really busy. And we were sort of a bit fresh, hadn't quite found our feet. And then we were approached by two people who said they wanted to make a film. They were going to make a film about the Indian railways, and would we like to be in this film? And we were a bit kind of dubious because we didn't know if this was some kind of weird con or something, but they seemed really genuine. So we joined them, and we were two characters in this film, which was made for Indian Railways. And I was called Jane, he was called Peter, and we had very, very tightly scripted lines. So we couldn't go off the script, which was very
very positive about Indian Railways, whereas the experience was a little different. But it was a wonderful adventure, and we went off all around Rajasthan, and just the vibrancy and the colour of that part of India was intoxicating, really. And so that was a wonderful trip, and that was the first experience of filmmaking, which was, quite an interesting way to start, because we'd be in a street surrounded by hundreds of people all looking, and it was a really fun and dynamic way to start making films.
Did they pay you for it?
No. No.
Oh, okay.
But they did. We did get free travel and accommodation stuff, which was fine. That was good.
So after having, where else did you go on that trip? You went to India, and you must.
We went up into Nepal after India, and yeah, that was another lovely contrast. Being up in those, trekking up. We went up the Langtang trek, up into the mountains there, up to, the Langtang is 7,000 meters, not as high as Everest, but we just went into the foothills of it. But just that sense of sitting up there on the top of the world, and that fresh air, in filling your lungs, and that cool air was wonderful, and looking out at those snow-capped mountains, and just that sense of freedom was wonderful.
Well, after having all that fun traveling, it becomes time to get down to some serious studying for you, and you choose zoology at university, followed by an MA in TV production, which led on eventually to your first film, which was about inmates in a prison. Well, that sounds pretty challenging. What was that like?
That was, I went to, after I did zoology at Bristol and studied animals, and then went on. I was pretty clear on what I wanted to do. Those early experiences really made it quite clear to me what I wanted to do, and that was make films. And going to film school, we were pretty much given a very, we could do whatever we liked, really. And I was very interested in this sense of freedom, of being free to explore, and the idea of being incarcerated and imprisoned was sort of the opposite to that. And that concept was kind of frightening to me, but I was somehow interested in it. And so my first film was about people in prison, and it was about their creative freedom, their ways of exploring their own creativity in prison. But for that film, I worked with the lifers in HMP Caulfield and Bristol, and I went on to the sex offenders wing in Wandsworth Prison, and I went around a lot of prisons. In fact, the oldest prison in Britain, which is in Shepton Mallet, is the Napoleonic prison. I spent time in there too. So it was very interesting to go into those spaces, but it was quite a confusing thing to do, because obviously people have done, if you don't go to prison for no reason. So there was a lot of morality involved. So it was quite an emotionally exhausting project to work on, but extremely interesting.
But I'm surprised that you were even allowed to go in with cameras and filming. I mean, was access a problem?
Access just took ages, yeah. But I was surprised. But I think that's the thing about being young and being a student. You can ask, and if you ask, sometimes people say yes. And if you ask in the right way and you're polite and you've got a good idea, then more often than not, I've found people do say yes. So that was just, I just made I got on the phone, wrote a lot of letters, and they let me in.
Well done you. I don't know whether it's a result of that, but you later or then went on to get a job as a researcher on a film production about the Arctic. How was filming in sub-zero temperatures?
That was absolutely amazing. Or it was a sort of dream first job. I think after the whole prison experience, I thought maybe I'd go into social documentary, and maybe I'd get involved in that kind of world. But then I applied for a job at Survival.TV, which is in Norwich at the time, and it was a job to make 2 Arctic films, one of them on polar bears, and that was just such a thrill, such a total privilege to first of all, research, spend a lot of time researching where were the best locations, what were the bears doing, what scientists were working, with bears, you know, who knew where they were denning and how to film them and what time of year, and all of that, all the logistics involved, all the financing of it, and you know how many jerry cans of petrol we'd need, and you know how many snow scooters, and what we were going to wear. All those questions were exciting to try and find answers for, and of course going up to film there was just again going into another fabulous environment. I remember flying into Svalbard and just looking down at the sea and seeing this vast expanse of ice, all broken up into these sort of geometric shapes, and it was just so stunningly beautiful.
Yeah, I it's funny you say that, because I know exactly what you're talking about. I've flown into Svalbard myself, and it's pretty impressive. I mean, it's a cliche to say it, but it does have a feeling of being completely outside anything you've ever experienced. A whole nother world, a whole other planet, you know. And I loved it up there. It was amazing. But you were there during the, yes, you must have been, was it the 24-hour daylight, was it, when you were there?
Yes, it was which was lovely, but quite confusing, but it was very useful, because I think we had about a week to 10 days where the weather was terrible, absolutely grey and dull, and no, you know, there was just a few reindeer sort of munching on the lichen, but no polar bears, and the most grim weather, so it didn't look very nice. And that sense of pressure, spent so much time planning this and so much money had gone into it, and there we all were and nothing was happening. And then when the clouds broke and the sun appeared, and it just lit the whole landscape up like a beautiful sort of amphitheatre, that was a wonderful moment. Yeah, so that, and because it was 24 hours, we obviously then could go out filming and make the most of that time.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you're talking about. In fact, it's funny that I mean, I think in Svalbard there are more polar bears than people in Svalbard, and so you think you're going to see them all over the place. And actually, it's quite hard. I mean, I was there for over a week, and only on the last day did I see a polar bear. So I sympathise with your difficulties.
Yeah,
but yeah, it
was just like that. You know, we'd waited and waited, and then this young bear appeared, and this was my first sighting of a bear. And he was about 2.5 years old. He was obviously recently left his mother, and he was out hunting on the ice. And because we had this wonderful 24-hour light, we could just stick with him. So we just followed his movements as he sort of, moved around the fjord trying to find ring seals under the ice. And every hunting attempt he made, you know, he sort of was so patient, and we watched him, and you could sort of see the light glinting in his fur, and it was just, it was such a touching, poignant thing to watch. And then each time he'd sort of hammer down on the top of the ice and snow to try and break through into the layer underneath, and each time he'd put his head in and try and pull something out and come out with nothing. And I really felt a lot of empathy for that young bear who was trying to survive.
Yeah, quite. Jacinth, there's some questions coming in as we're talking, and one of them I'm going to address straight off the bat, from Luna in Chicago, who says, Alastair, for some reason the connection is not great today, so you're a bit out of focus, but if you can sit still, we can see you better. Luna, I apologize. You're right, the internet connection isn't great from where I'm talking to you. We did a test call just before talking as we are now, and it all worked perfectly. And right now, yes, I do seem to be more out of focus than I'm happy with, but I'll try and sit still, although it's very difficult for me. Anyway, back to the conversation. Like many of us, you were and are an admirer of the great Sir David Attenborough. And in the early days of your filmmaking career, you happened by chance to see him in London. Did you talk to him?
I saw him. He came towards me in the street, and I, knew straight away it was Sir David Attenborough. And I was really excited, and I wanted to talk to him, but I was quite young, and it was quite late on in the day. He looked like he was going home after a hard day, and I remember sort of chasing after him a little bit, you know, secretly behind, but I didn't pluck up the courage to, well, I think it wasn't I didn't pluck up the courage, but I actually decided that it wasn't the right moment. I didn't want to bother him with a, you know, asking for an autograph or something silly at the end of the day. But subsequently I've met him at film festivals and other occasions, and so that, you know, I've obviously have met David Attenborough since, but he was very very supportive to me, because when I first was starting out and I wanted to go to Tanzania on an expedition to look at the coral reefs there, I wrote to David. This was shortly after I'd seen him in the street, and he then very kindly supported me in that expedition. So I had his support, and I think that seeing him in the street had sort of encouraged me to then write to him and maybe it's
serendipity. Maybe, who knows?
Yeah.
But did he? So you wrote to him, and he wrote back to you?
Yeah, he wrote a really nice letter back saying, you know, he was in support of what I was doing, thought it was a really good idea, and he sent me a small amount of money, but very significant to me, to go on that trip. So I was forever grateful to him for that.
And is that letter framed on your wall right now?
I've got it. It's not framed on my wall, but it's in a box, kept. Yeah, it's kept.
And years later, and we'll come to years later, but when you caught up with him years later and your career was established, did you remind him of this, of the role he played in the beginning of your?
I mentioned the letter.
Yeah, and that's how sweet. That's lovely. Well, let's have a look at some of your career highlights. In 2002, you directed a documentary about the world's most dangerous snake, the black mamba. Now, Jacinth, these are the kind of things that slither through my nightmares. They're big and they're very fast, and if they bite you, you'll die horribly in minutes. Did you have any reservations about accepting this job?
I did, actually. Yeah, I was actually really nervous about this one. I remember the new year before I knew I was, I'd accepted the job, and I went to North Norfolk and I went out camping for New Year under the stars. And I remember the following day, New Year's Day, I was absolutely petrified about the year ahead. I just thought, you know, what have I done? What have I signed up for? Yeah, I mean, it was, you know, obviously you are getting close to a venomous animal. So there were moments where I did feel quite nervous, but of course, in the holy burly of filmmaking, you kind of forget about the fact that there is a real danger there.
I would never forget this. I would not forget that, I promise. But God, I mean, you sound very, lackadaisical about it. I can't believe it was that relaxed. Did you have you had some snake experts with you, I presume? Yeah,
we did. So we went down to South Africa, and we were working in a place called Hoedspruit, which is up on the way to Kruger. And we were working with a very experienced snake catcher. So he's handled hundreds of mambas, and he picks them up with his tongs, and then he puts them, his special technique of putting them in the bag, getting their head in the bag. And so, you know, he knew what he was doing. But I think there were times, I think the time when I felt in danger really was when the cameraman we had the camera on a long pole, and we were trying to get that fantastic shot where the mamba's coming towards you. And they are aggressive snakes. That's their nature. I mean, all snakes would prefer to flee than to fight, but of all snakes, the mamba is the most likely to be aggressive. I mean, it will respond if it's bothered by something. It will respond aggressively. So there we are with the camera on a pole, and we're sort of shoving it towards this animal, and it's coming towards us, which is what we want, because we want that shot. But in order to get that shot, I had to hold the cameraman had the pole, and I'm holding the cameraman and guiding him back through the bush, and there's a lot of, you know, vegetation stuff around, and it's a thing, you know, if I trip over and he tumbles on me, and then it's all going to get really messy.
One way of putting it.
Yeah, but it was fine. I mean, we'd gone through a lot of pre-production, and we had anti-venom, we had emergency things instructions in our pocket, and we'd gone through a whole routine should something happen, and so I didn't feel like it was really likely to happen, but yeah, I did have a few sleepless nights over that one.
Where did you say this was again that you were filming?
This was in Hoedspruit, which is in South Africa,
Okay.
on the way to Kruger.
No, I'm just making a mental note to myself not to go there.
They're not just there, Alastair. They're all over.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah,
okay. Oh,
yeah.
you know, South Africa's a wonderful country, but yeah, now you've told me that. No, I'm not. I mean, it's just, you know, there is. I think what's slightly freaky about those snakes is that they can almost stand up. I mean, they can.
Yes.
So it's almost to eye level height, which is quite scary. So,
there's a lot of myths. I think one of the reasons for making the film was that we wanted to look at some of those myths. That the black mamba of all snakes has got more myths about it than any other, and it's to do with its speed. It does travel very fast. I think it's something like 12 and a half miles per hour, something like that, and it's 4 meters long, and it can rear up. I think it's longer than 4 actually, but it can rear up 4 meters, I think. So it's a fast, aggressive snake, and it bites, and it will bite repeatedly. So it's not just the one bite; it's more. And I think just 2 drops of its venom are enough to kill a human, but it's got 20 drops per fang. So it's definitely lethal. And so this has led to a lot of myths about it. And that's what we were exploring. We're exploring some of these, and we were reconstructing some of these stories about. There was one story where a snake had gone into a village hut and bitten 12 members of the same family, and they'd all died. So we were, we had a lot of fun actually, because we reconstructed that.
Well, yeah, your idea of fun and mine are not quite the same. So you must have got quite a dramatic film out of it at the end, I imagine.
Yeah, it was very dramatic, and we had a really good musician as well. Actually, he composed some fantastic music to go along with it. So I really enjoyed making that film because it was fun, it was dynamic, and it was edgy, certainly. And I think I remember we went with our snake catcher into one house where they had I think 3 of their dogs killed by mambas in their garden, and they had an Angora farm full of rabbits. Mm-hmm. And this was drawing the snakes in. And we went to try and capture some of these snakes that they'd spotted one. And we were rootling around, the snake catcher was rootling around, looking under sort of corrugated iron and old pots and things, trying to find them. And what he found, instead of finding one black mamba, was he found the eggs in a nest, about 12 hatched eggs. So then it wasn't just one mamba, there were actually lots of little mambas, probably all over the place. So mambas have lovely soft eggs, and when they're beautiful, when they hatch, it's rather beautiful, but they hatch with a full complement of venom. So even though they're then very small, they're just as deadly as the adults. So he then spread out and picked up, he actually managed to find some of these small young snakes. But what alarmed me was that the woman who lived in this farm, her children were running barefoot outside the garden, and I was just
oh dear. Well, let's move swiftly from snakes to monkeys. In 2008, Jacinth, you were the producer on a fascinating series of documentaries called Monkey Thieves, which follows the lives of a lawless gang of macaque monkeys in India. But before we talk about it, which we will do, let's watch a clip from that series, Monkey Thieves.
Beyond the gates of the complex lies a whole new world of opportunity, a city for their taking. But it's also a place where lethal dangers wait. Tarak has no choice but to lead his troop downtown in search of food. The gang will eat virtually anything people do, and the city streets are full of easy pickings. The Gulta gang's hometown is the famous pink-daubed city of Jaipur. As the population approaches 3 million people, it's one of the fastest growing places on the planet. And as the city expands further into the forest home of the monkeys, the primates have no choice but to head into town in search of food. With around 50 separate troops of food-hungry macaques roaming this metropolis, the competition for both human and monkey survival has never been so tough. Although Tarek's gang and all the other troops roaming the streets are legally and spiritually protected, when it comes down to literally stealing food off their tables, the locals sometimes lose their patience.
So Jacinth, this is it's quite a particular way of filmmaking wildlife, where the animals are assigned names and individual characters, and at times it seems as if they're almost actors following a script. I mean, I admit I watched the whole film. I found it very addictive to watch. But tell us about the background to this. What was a typical day's shooting like, if there was such a thing as a typical day's shooting?
Well, I mean, I think this was the most enjoyable production I've worked on, just because it was really, really good fun, and it was lovely because it took me back to India. So it was working in Jaipur again, which is the Pink City, and it's a very colourful, beautiful environment to work in. Life is very much out on the streets, and you've got these markets and colour and saris, and so visually it's a very wonderful place to make a film, because you've just got whichever way you turn the camera, you've got something really beautiful to focus on. Yeah, this project, it was scripted. So we started off. Macaques are very intelligent. They're very they live in they've got really interesting, complex social behaviour. And they're rather like human beings with no sort of veil of politeness. You know, they are aggressive and they are competitive, and they'll squabble and fight and do all the things that we might feel like doing, like grabbing the biggest piece of cake. We won't do it, but they will. So they were really good characters to work with, and we knew that we were going to get some really good behaviour out of them. So we were able to script this to a certain degree. And also they're identifiable. You have got characters within the troupe. Genuinely, you've got the dominant male and the different females, and you can identify them. And so and we were working in one area for over a long period of time as well, so we could build up a sort of relationship and an understanding of who they were. So it was scripted, and it was fun, and it wasn't supposed to be serious. It was about a million miles away from a very classic wildlife documentary, but to make it was just brilliant, because we could, we went to get up in the morning. You have to get up really, really early in the morning because it's so incredibly hot. It's about 40 degrees. So when you came out of where we were staying, it was like walking into an oven. And then we went out on the streets, and we had a plan for the day, which would basically involve some sort of raid by the monkeys, because they're always after food. So we would either go and scout out the market, and we could basically just wait. The troop they rampage through the streets, Jaipur, and they follow a particular path, a particular troop. More or less where they're going to go. So all we really needed to do was just go and find a market, stake it out. Or if we wanted to create a situation, then that was really easy to do as well. So we had one example of that was we decided it might be quite fun to see if they would raid a kid's birthday party. And so we went and spoke to a local family, and it was the daughter, it was her 12th birthday, and she wanted to have a party. And we said, well, would you mind if we invited the monkeys along, and we'll host the party. And she was happy to do that. And so all we needed to do was sort of lay out a massive spread of food, and we had all sorts of classic party food, party rings and jam, jammy dodgers, all of that, and a big birthday cake, balloons, presents, and we just waited, and we weren't sure whether or not they would come in. They might decide that day to go on a different route around town, but they did. They came in within, they spotted it, they know their patch, and so they arrived. And then you just You could just watch it all happen, watch it all unfold. And what's so interesting is they're such curious animals. They're so interested in everything that they'll get a present and they'll just rip it open and see what's inside and play with it and bite it and chew it. Here's one of the macaques with the balloons. So they're like, they're very much like people. They're interested, and so they're wonderful to work with. And it's a completely different experience to working with a very shy animal that you can't get close to, or you have to wait for weeks for a nest to hatch or whatever. This was fun and dynamic, and we were always on the move, and we literally had to move with the monkeys. So we were, it was quite exhausting as well in the heat.
Yeah, I can imagine it was easier than some shoots, because they're just so busy. They're always doing something, and they're always there. What I found quite strange was that the way they seem to occupy a space between the animal world and the human world. I mean, they are so close to us. They're just, you feel that it wouldn't take much, and they could be, instead of breaking up the children's birthday party, they could be sitting at the table enjoying it and giving presents. And
yes.
I mean, they are quite extraordinary creatures.
Yes, and they do, obviously, in Hindu culture, they occupy, they are sacred animals, and the Hindu people worship them and feed them. So they have a very close relationship with the people in Jaipur, and so they are tolerated. So it's created this very close relationship, which is both touching and difficult at times. Like naughty kids, they push it far too far.
So after the hot and hectic streets of Jaipur and the mischievous macaques, you started work on the incredible journey made by Loggerhead turtles. What were the main challenges on this one?
Well, this was a completely different, totally different project, totally different way of approaching it. This was a feature film, and on this project, I was brought in at the front end as a logistics, looking at the logistics, logistics producer, looking at how we were going to go about making this film, and it was the whole. I mean, it couldn't be more different to Monkey Thieves in its style, and it's a very completely different pace, and it's a cinematic experience, which is about the most epic journey of the Loggerhead turtle.
Just tell us what that journey is. An incredibly long. I mean, it's an
extraordinary. It literally is an extraordinary journey. The Loggerhead turtles are born on the beaches of Florida, and then they launch themselves across the sand and enter the ocean, and then they're committed then to this epic journey where they follow the Gulf Stream around the Atlantic, and they do a huge odyssey, really, that can take up to 20 years, and they travel north, going up towards Arctic waters, and then they spin round and they go down the coast of sort of Europe and Africa, and then spin around to the Azores. And the Azores are a juvenile breeding. They grow there. There's a lot of food in the Azores, a lot of bait balls and so forth. So it's a rich hunting ground for them, feeding ground, and they grow and develop there. And then they take the return journey towards the Caribbean and adulthood, and then they mate eventually, and the females return to their natal beach, the beach where they were born, to lay their eggs. So it's an extraordinary journey. I think it's 9,000 miles. Takes maybe 20 years of their lives. It's a beautiful story, and it was a beautiful film, and it was obviously logistically difficult to make. But we do now we're in a wonderful position as filmmakers of having scientists who've found out so much detail about their lives through the use of tracking devices and satellite tracking and so on. So we do understand the journey of the Loggerhead turtle very well. And
let me just dive in there, Jacinth, and let's show a clip from that film about the Loggerhead turtles.
She has been digging for 3 days to reach the surface. Her shell is still soft, and she is no bigger than the palm of a child's hand. With no teeth, no defenses, she has only her will. The sea is just 40 meters away. But for her, so small, the beach is a great divide. She is not alone. Every year from the start of spring, nearly 2 million loggerhead turtles are born on the beaches of Florida.
Jacinth, something I want to ask you. You have a family. You have, I think, 2 children. I don't know what are they, young children. How do you manage being away a lot of the time and having a family and just juggling your work-life requirements?
I think, I mean, having a family has been such a wonderful journey of its own. So I've really embraced that. And I think someone said to me, I was very grateful to them when I had kids. They said, you know, it's a very short time. So I really took that to heart. You know, they said, you know, they're gorgeous. And I think they said something like, they had teenage children, and they said, if I would give anything in the world for one day with my kids when they were 3, 4, 5, 6, to have one day with them at that age. And that really resonated, because I thought, okay, I really need to make the most of this. So I did make the most of it. So I remained freelance, and I've taken projects on when, you know, I've tried to have a good balance there. I've tried to give my kids a lot of time and also put enough time into my career. So yeah, it's not, obviously it's a real juggle. It's a juggle for everybody with a family, but it's, you know, hugely enriching. Yeah.
But have you been able to, I mean, have you been away during this time, or have you made sure that everything you do is local?
Yes, I have been away on various shoots and trips. Obviously, there are roles that you can take. For example, if some projects I've just been the edit producer, so I've come in at the end of the production phase just to go into the edit, which means you then don't have to travel. So I've done projects like that. I've also been a series producer where I've worked overseeing. You know, we actually made 54K films in a year, so it was a huge project. We were working with Off the Fence Productions, so a brilliant production company in Bristol and Netherlands, and also with a company down in South Africa. So I was flying down South Africa to work with them. But again, it was, you know, I balanced it out and made it work around the family. Yeah,
well done you. How old are they now?
I've got teenagers now. So they're past the so now they were cute. Yeah, so these are my 2 kids, Hugh and Ozzy, and I think it became a particular juggle when they became choristers, because both of them sang at Wells Cathedral as choristers, and that was a period of 7 years, which has only just come to an end. So that was a real juggle, because they had their own schedule. So I was trying to balance mine with theirs, and that was quite demanding. But yeah, so they're now teenagers, 17 and 14.
See, they're probably, you go away now and they're probably thinking, phew, she's gone away.
So now I'm quite happy to go to the other side of the world.
Yeah.
I'm only joking.
No, I know. No, I congratulate you. Well done. You've said that, I've read that you said that one of the most fascinating animals you've made a film about is, is the hyena. Because they're not normally thought of as particularly likable creatures. Are we just misunderstanding them? Are hyenas misunderstood?
Yes, they are. They're hugely misunderstood, and I lament that strongly, because I mean, we've all seen films like Lion King, you know, and they're just depicted as these gruesome, you know, foaming at the mouths kind of creatures.
Mm-hmm.
And it couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, yes, it's true they're scavengers, but they're also amazing hunters, and they give lions a real run for their money. But what's extraordinary about the hyena is its social life, and actually it's quite interesting because they're not like they're very similar to macaques and primates in that respect, because they have very large brains and they have very, very complex societies, and their societies are female dominated. They have an alpha female, and the female, I think their behaviour is very, very different to what you might expect, and more or less everything about them is a surprise. So right. The females are much more aggressive than the males. Their bodies are flushed with testosterone, and when they have their offspring in the womb, there's a lot of androgens and testosterone flushing around the growing embryos, so they're born aggressive. Females are very aggressive, males are less so. The females actually bully the males a lot, and the males are much more chilled, and they try and they spend a lot of time away from the females. But the females also have all this testosterone and hormones running through their bodies, means that the females also develop male sexual organs.
So, really? I didn't know that. Oh my God.
No, it's totally bizarre. But they have what's called a pseudopenis. And I don't know how much you want me to talk about this, but we
love talking about pseudopenises on.
Great.
Yeah.
So they give birth through this, and they mate through it, and they also urinate through it. And no one fully understands why why they have it. It's still up for debate. One idea is that they might be able to control mating, because mating is very difficult. And they can, because they mate with lots of males, they can, and they use it to urinate. They may actually be able to flush out sperm if they don't want, if that's not a good mating for them. I don't know. I don't think it's fully understood, but certainly it puts a different spin on their social life, and so they're fascinating creatures to make a film about.
I shall look at hyenas in a whole different light now. Yeah, let's have a little clip. We've got a little video of part of that series that you made. If we can have a look at that, that'd be great.
There's a bright new face in a family of spotted hyenas. She's a princess, daughter of the alpha female, and destined to lead the Chimbwe clan. But first, this little cub must prove herself. She has to fight for her place in a savagely competitive family. Surrounded by bullies and killers, she must use courage and cunning to turn enemies into allies. Has this little cub got what it takes to be a queen?
Wonderful. Now, you've been involved in wildlife filmmaking for a number of years. Just talk to us a little bit about the changes. I'm talking in terms of technology here, the changes that you've seen over that time. Because I imagine when you started, you were working on film, and obviously you won't be doing that now. So how have things changed over the course of your career from a technological point of view?
Technology-wise, it's changed hugely in the time that I've been making films. And you're right, I did start out I trained in video, but then when I went to work at Survival, they were still shooting on film. And so that was a very different discipline to making films as we do now. At that time, we'd have to take the cans of film out into the field, and obviously get them through X-rays and that sort of thing. And you had your cans, and you had to, every time, when your film roll ran out, you had to stop what you were doing and reload, and it took a lot, it took time. And at that time, your animal might be disappearing, or the sort of climax of your sequence was happening in front of your eyes, and you couldn't capture it. So that could be frustrating, but film was a wonderful medium to work on. And in fact, those those films can still be used and upgraded to 4K because they've got so much information in them. The quality is so high. But we were also editing in a different way to the way we edit now. So we were, the editors literally cutting the film up and editing in a linear process. Whereas now you'll see it's non-linear. You can move stuff around freely, and it's much easier to do, much more creative, and a much faster process. So the change from film to working on video was a big one. And then obviously now we have all sorts of miniature cameras and drones. When I started out, a huge, a large proportion of your budget would go, if you had it, on a helicopter or a fixed wing aeroplane. But now you've got a drone, so you're much more able to get really wonderful aerials. So we're able to visualize landscapes and places where animals live much more readily and easily, and that brings a huge filmic quality to the projects for a small amount of budget. So that's a really exciting development, as are all the small cameras that you can, GoPros and things that you can put on helmets or on animals, or to get completely different perspectives. So it's become incredibly exciting what you can do with technology now.
Because when I watch some of the wildlife films that are shown nowadays, I look at them and I mean in amazement, and I ask myself, can it get any better? Have we hit a wall where are we at the edge of where we can go, where technology will allow us to go? Because it seems there's nothing we can't. I mean, we can get so close and film animal behavior from so many different angles and in so many different ways. It seems pretty much perfect now. I'm just wondering in the future, where is there left to go with wildlife filmmaking? That's what my question in a roundabout way is. Where do we go from here? Or don't we? Do we just stay where we are?
I think that, I don't know. I don't really know the answer to that, Alastair, in a way, because we don't know quite what the technological advantages are going to be and what we might be able to do. But certainly, I mean, the stories, there's a phrase, there are good stories, that all the good stories in a way have been told before, but each time you tell it with a new spin, and in the time that you make that film, it has a different cultural, it lands differently. So I think, we're always going to need to have these good stories, and the stories will change. We're at a particular point in time where, the environment is under a lot of pressure, and so our stories need to adapt and evolve with that, and the technology will also improve and develop, no doubt. But I think at the heart of a good film is always the story, and so yes, I think that things will evolve. I don't know exactly how. I don't know how they'll be better. Certainly we've got some brilliant imagery and wonderful shots that perhaps can't be bettered, but I think we'll find that they can and are, and the way we approach films will change. Yeah, fantastic.
Jacinth, can I ask you some questions that have been sent in?
Sure.
If I can, they're popping up on my phone down to my left here. So Jana in Alpine. Hi, Jana. She says, which shoot has been your biggest challenge? And with new technology, is there anywhere you want to go back to now?
Which shoot has been the most challenging? They've all been challenging in different ways. I think working with the Arctic shark in Baffin Island was very challenging. I was making a film about sharks and was very interested in the Greenland shark, which is a very, very little known creature and hadn't been filmed very many times. So it was a real first, and we were going out onto the ice in extremely cold conditions on Baffin Island, and having to drill through 6 foot of solid ice to make a hole to deploy a small remote camera. And when we got the camera into the water, we set up a camp all around, and we sort of had some bait down to try and draw the shark in, and we were just waiting for it, and it was freezing cold. And then we had technical problems. The video couldn't cope with the conditions. Can you hear me? It's raining. very quite loud.
I can hear you, and I can hear rain, which is rather lovely.
Rain.
Yeah. Raining the wood behind you.
Yeah. So that was very challenging because we had technical problems and we didn't know if this very elusive, slow-moving, deep water shark was ever going to arrive. But it did arrive, and we got some glimpses of it as it took big bites out of this bait and twisted its whole body. So that was a very challenging experience, but it was a really exciting shoot because we were glimpsing something that was rarely seen. And
anywhere you'd like to go back to with today's technology?
I'd love to go back to. I'd really love to make another film on polar bears. I'd love to go back to the Arctic. I'd also love to go back to Madagascar and work there. And yeah, I mean, I'd love to take drones to Madagascar, for example, and get some amazing aerial shots of all those beautiful pockets of forest, and particularly the Singi. I worked in the north of Madagascar, making a film about lemurs and crocodiles, and they live on a huge massif, a Singi massif, which consists of very sharp, razor-sharp, eroded rock.
Wow.
And it's got sort of sunken forests in it and subterranean rivers that crocodiles live in. So it's a really magical environment, but one that when we made the film, we had a lot of difficulty getting aerials. So I'd love to go back and put drones up over Ankara. That would be incredible.
Yeah, wonderful. Mike in Montclair in the US. Hi, Mike, a regular watcher. She says, I don't know if we can help here. She says, we have 2 professional photographers. My question is, do you know what to do with the old negatives? I have thousands of them, all sizes. What should Mike do with her old negatives? Get them scanned, I guess.
I think you get them scanned, yeah. I mean, I've got old negatives too. I think you can get them scanned. I think you can scan them yourself.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But again, I think that the image quality is very good, so it should be possible to preserve some of those images.
Yeah, I mean, I've done it myself. You're with a flatbed scanner, and you have a negative holder, which will take 6 or so strips of 35mm negative, and you scan that, and the quality's it's great. It's fantastic. Yeah. So there, you've got some scanning ahead of you. Haley in Atlanta says, she says, the background in the photo behind you is beautiful. Where is it?
I have no idea. I have absolutely no idea. Yeah. It's beautiful though, isn't it?
You don't know where it is. Okay, mystery.
I'm sorry.
All right. And dear old William in the United States says, interviewer picture great. That's me. So I seem to be, I've gone from out of focus back to focus again. Thank you, William, for pointing that out. That's great. Let's go back to, I mentioned earlier on about your sighting of David Attenborough on the streets of London. And a lot later, well, last year, you somehow managed to get him up on stage at one of the world's largest music festivals in Glastonbury, which is near where you live, in front of 200,000 people. Did he take a lot of persuading to do that?
Actually, no. I think it took a long time. It took a long time to make that happen. We worked on it for around a year, but actually the conversation with David was pretty straightforward, but we didn't ask him straight away. I think what we did was we came up with the idea of having, I'd always wanted to see wildlife on the Glastonbury stages. I've lived next to the Glastonbury Festival for 20 years, and I've always looked at those beautiful, magnificent screens with Coldplay or Adele or whoever the big name band is on, and just thought, wouldn't it be wonderful in this outside arena to see wildebeest or whales, on these screens against this wonderful natural backdrop. So it had always been, I'd always thought that would be a good idea, but the idea of bringing or asking Sir David Attenborough to attend just seemed like the right moment, and both Glastonbury and the BBC felt that it was the right moment too. So we came together and it was a long time in the planning. But when we actually asked Sir David, he could see the value in doing it, and I think he's one of those people that, you know, when he sees a good reason for doing something, he's prepared to do it. But we were nervous about asking, because obviously he was 92 at the time, and not every 92-year-old wants to spend Sunday afternoon in a muddy field with thousands and thousands of people. So we were nervous about asking him, and whether or not he would think it was, you know, whether he'd be prepared to do it. But he was, and so it was a really exciting thing to happen.
And how was he received? How did the crowd react?
It was a very special moment, and I think we were really nervous. It's one of those things that you can plan it all you like, but you don't know how it's going to go on the day. And there was always that sense that maybe something would go wrong, and at the very least it could have been just chucking it down with rain and really miserable and grim. But what we wanted it to be the moment that it promised to be, you know, a very special moment. So, but as it happened, it was a beautiful day, and yeah, we had a lot of films and clips coming on beforehand, and we had a wonderful soundscape that ran just prior to him coming out. And what was so interesting was that the audience just they just were very peaceful. You know, they were very quiet. So there was a quietness just descended over that huge field full of people. I mean, there were faces as far back as you can see. And it was just very peaceful, and everyone was just watching these spellbinding images and listening to this soundscape. We had Weddell seals under the Antarctic ice, and their incredible calls, which are very evocative and strange. And then we had humpbacks singing, and then we went to bearded seals in the Arctic and their beautiful descending calls, and everyone was just listening to this. And then just at the end of that, there was a sort of there was just that ripple effect through the audience, a kind of roar of applause, not a roar, but a gentle growing of applause as he appeared. And it was just felt, you know, it just was a wonderful moment. It was very, very atmospheric, and there was a sense of oneness. I think everyone was feeling very grateful that he was there, and grateful for these animals and this beautiful planet that we have.
Congratulations on pulling that off. Yeah, you must have felt pretty happy about that. Sally in Marlborough, MA, says, "Have you ever filmed on IMAX?"
No, I haven't personally. I'd love to do that. That would be amazing.
Yeah, just to come. Okay. Yeah. Heidi says, "Hello, Heidi. Which countries or..." This is quite a good question. I don't know what your answer will be. Which countries or cultures in the world do you think manage to live most in harmony with nature in your experience? That's a lovely question.
That's a lovely question. I think that's a really interesting question, and quite a lot of cultures do. I mean, Hindus have a very interesting relationship with animals. I made a film about that relationship, and there's some very, because they feel, you know, they have a spiritual relationship with animals, and they see animals as the living embodiment of their ancestors or gods, and so they're very tolerant of animals. And there's a temple, we did some filming at a temple in Deshanoke, where they feed rats, and it's the rat temple, and everyone comes to worship the rats, and they bring food for the rats, and they let the rats they drink milk that the rats have drunk, and it's a very close physical relationship with this rat. So you know, and it's a bit skin crawling to watch, because we feel a bit uncomfortable about rodents and the germs they might have, or so on. So I think India has a really interesting relationship with animals. It's not always straightforward, and they're not always, you know, obviously there's some things that go on there that aren't great too, but there's certainly a real relationship with animals, which is exciting and interesting. But other countries too, like Madagascar, up in Ankarano, when I was filming, making that croc and lemur film, the local tribe there they believed that both the crocs and the lemurs were spiritual to them, and they worshipped and protected them. So I think a lot of cultures have some really touching relationships with animals, and so it's very nice when you come upon that.
Yeah. Well, Roger in the United States. Hi, Roger. Roger says, any favorite animals? What's your favorite animal?
Favorite? I love sharks. Actually, really.
Wow.
Really.
Why did I have a feeling you were going to say something like that? Yeah.
I love sharks. I love the marine environment, and I really respect sharks because they've been around on the planet for such a long time, 450 million years. So I've got a lot of time for sharks.
Well, that's good to hear. Jacinth, let's just because we're starting to come towards the end of our conversation, but we should just talk about the future, and I'm talking about the future of the environment. I mean, personally, I find almost on a daily basis when I read a newspaper and I read an article about another chunk of ice falling off a glacier or another area of rainforest being destroyed, it can get very depressing, and one can end up feeling very pessimistic about the future. How do you sit in that? Are you optimistic about the future, particularly the future of biodiversity? I'm particularly thinking about.
Well, obviously, it's really hard to look at it, and I think most animals that I've worked on, most projects I've worked on, those species are, a lot of them, critically endangered, and I've seen deforestation myself. I've witnessed it out of the plane in Madagascar, and those brutal red streaks of where all the trees have been taken and the soil's washing away, and Svalbard where the ice has melted, in areas where I was filming polar bears on solid ice before. So it's very hard to read about. It's very hard to watch. It's very hard to learn about, and it is. We are. I do think we're at a critical point, but I think that it's personally, I've made a sort of conscious decision to be positive about the environment, because I think we can't afford not to be. I think that we have to make positive change. We need to make positive change now, and the only way to do that is to learn as much as you can about it, and remain positive so that you can affect some change. So we don't know what's going to happen, but we do know that it's undeniable that we do need to make some serious changes, and really rapidly. So I think it's not time to get depressed. It's not time to sort of hide away from reality. It's time to embrace it and try and do what you can, and what we all can. And that can be small things, and it can be big things, small things. Obviously, we need big things. We need our governments to take note and make serious changes. But we can also make changes in our own lives, which will make a difference. So I think it's important not to feel disempowered. It's important to feel positive and try and do what you can.
Lovely. Thank you for that answer. Jacinth, one last question for you, from Dylan in Belchertown. He says, Dylan, I could have written this question myself. He says, do you always have a stills photographer with you on shoots?
No, very often we don't, and that's why there's not always that many pictures of our shoots. In fact, we generally, I take a lot of stills when I'm out. I do that. We generally don't have a specific stills photographer. That's the truth. Sometimes we do, but on the whole,
it's a budget thing, I guess.
It's a budget thing. It's a budget.
Yeah. And I come very cheap. Except for, but in my contract, there's no black mambas.
No, you won't have a film, Alastair, but any other, you're most welcome.
That's great. Jacinth, thank you so much for sharing with us your amazing career in wildlife filmmaking. It's been lovely hearing you talk, and it sounds like you have a fascinating life. Just before we finish, tell me what's in the future for you. What's coming up? I mean, we're in this strange virus time at the moment, which hopefully will be the other side of before too long. What have you got on the books?
Well, at the moment, yeah, there's been a lot of project development going on in lockdown. Obviously, it's difficult to get shoots out at the moment. There are some shoots going out, but it makes the logistics of a wildlife film, any film, even more difficult, because you don't know whether you can get your camera people out, your crews out, when they can come back again, or whether they're going to have to be quarantined and so on. So the rules are changing all the time. So it's quite a difficult time for production right now. But there's a lot of development going on, and there's lots of there are lots of projects in the pipeline. So I don't know exactly what it's going to be, but I'm keen to get back out there.
Great. Well, I hope you are out there soon. I hope we all are. And thank you so much again for taking this time to share with us on Viking.TV. We appreciate it. Thank you, Jacinth.
It's been lovely talking to you, Alastair.
Thank you. Great. So I hope you enjoyed listening to Jacinth as much as I did. Anyone interested in watching David Attenborough talking to 200,000 people at a rock festival, you can find it on YouTube. We couldn't show it because of rights issues, but I do recommend going to YouTube and having a look at that. And that's it from me today. It's been lovely having you with me. So thank you from me and the Viking team, and see you next time. I wish you well. Thank you.